attention goes.
Hi, it's Richard and Craig with the Week 2 feedback video. And as you probably might expect, lots of coronavirus-related posts still happening, Craig. A lot of our learners are actually sort of finding ways of getting through, quite creative ways, I think, of getting through coronavirus. It's not just about meditating and practicing mindfulness necessarily, but people are eating chocolate, getting out in nature, laughter, friends. I mean, there's so many things that the people are doing now just to help get through this really difficult time.
Yeah, and doing it with awareness. And a number of our learners, just a week in, so much more aware of how much wandering the mind does. And just to always remember that's a sign of progress. That's not a sign you're getting it wrong. But you're noticing that as a sign of progress, because in that moment of noticing, you get to come back. And
it's funny, isn't it? I was looking into this just recently. The research actually shows that when we practice mindfulness, first we become more aware, and then that acceptance, that non-judgment piece kind of lags a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that's often what happens. People become aware of how distracted they are or stressed they are, and the acceptance of that comes a little bit later.
Yeah, that's right. And that initial awareness before the acceptance can be a little bit uncomfortable and frustrating.
Yeah.
And we encourage, frustration is not one of the practices on this course, so we won't be encouraging to practice frustration and self-criticism, because the awareness is the process working, and which is excellent. There have been some really interesting questions arising this week as well, and I thought we might have a look at a few of them. Like, if it's the nature of the mind to wander, why do we have to make it function in a counterintuitive way?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Is it the nature of the mind to wander?
Well, I think it's the habit of the mind to wander. We get into, because, when we're very young, like a young child, it's like all awareness. It's high beam. The attention is totally out.
It's true, isn't it?
I mean, the child's mind is not wandering. It's like, now, mind you, child doesn't have the ability to sustain attention in one place for a long time, but the attention is all out. But the mind wandering in that sort of internally distracted way, the self-talk, the self-criticism and so on, comes in reasonably early in life. So the nature of the mind to wander, well, the nature in the sense that it's second nature, in the sense that it's habitual, it becomes habitual. And so in a sense, mindfulness is a way of practicing getting out of that particular habit, because it's also the nature of the mind to be able to be, I suppose, trained in a way so that and it's not about suppressing the mind. I think that's an important thing.
It's a very important point, isn't it? Because a lot of people often think mindfulness is about suppressing those habits of mind wandering, getting rid of the thoughts, but
suppressing
it's really
the emotions.
It's not.
No, and it's that standing back. It's the non-reactivity. It's choosing what to engage with, what to leave alone. That's very different to suppressing. So that's why there's often a sense of calmness, even though we're in a sense retraining the mind. We're not reinforcing unhelpful habits. No. I think some of the learners also noticing that the listening meditation is quite interesting. And why is it that listening, even if it's the hum of the fridge going or the traffic noise or whatever, why is that calming? And I think the main thing is that we're not listening to the internal dialogue. So many things to do today, and what about this, and replaying conversations. I should have said that, and speculating about this and that. And so when we're more mindful, we stop listening to that, and then we just start hearing whatever's going on around us. And I think it's that sort of default mode switching off that kind of leads to this sense of calm and being present.
And it's just being present, isn't it? The sounds are happening right now, so we listen to them, and it doesn't matter if it's beautiful music and birds chirping or, that, as you said, the sound of traffic.
Yeah.
Listening to it brings us into the present, and then we're not stressing ourselves out with all that default.
And very often when somebody says, listening and that sound was really irritating me, well, we're probably not listening to the sound. We're probably listening to our internal dialogue about, I can't stand that dog barking, when's it going to shut up, and so on. And oh, gee, that fridge is noisy. And we're not actually listening to the sound. It's the internal dialogue over the top of it.
Yeah.
But a question too about, if we're not thinking, well, are we really present? And it's quite an interesting thing. Sometimes the mind does quieten right down during, say, meditation practice, and all of a sudden there's an awareness that there's no particular thoughts, just the presence to sounds and sensations. And then the mind chips in with a very subtle thought. oh, look at me, I'm not thinking.
Being so mindful right now.
Yeah, hey, this is great. I'm really getting good at mindfulness now.
Yeah.
This will be tremendous. It'll revolutionize my life. And all of a sudden,
I know that narrative very well.
I wonder if anybody else can notice how mindful I am. Does it really show on the outside? Probably does.
But they're very powerful moments, aren't they, when
Yeah.
there is that cessation of thinking, and
Yeah.
yet we're still very much present.
Yeah.
Not that that's the goal. It's not that we're trying to get rid of the thoughts again, but it's very important to notice those moments where we're very much here, even when there's no thinking about what's happening right now.
That's right. It's like, if you like, there are no clouds in the sky. It's just
Just a
a
blue
very
sky.
blue sky. And so, in a sense, that is presence, because the awareness is the presence. The thinking, when we lapse into thinking about future and past and so on, I suppose you could say we're not present in the sense that the mind's not present, but the actual awareness is the presence.
Yes.
And that's the thing.
Yeah, and coming back to listening as well, a lot of learners, as they've started to explore their relationships with themselves and with others, they've noticed as they start listening that kind of negative slant to a lot of our thoughts, the self-criticism, the self-judgment, and of course manage to step out of that and not be completely lost in it, which is the first step. But some of our learners as well are starting to sort of question, where's that come from? And even making some quite astute comments and Sherelle shared a really great quote that the way we talk to our children becomes their inner voice. And so often that harsh inner voice that we start to notice if we're really paying attention, which I think pretty much everybody has, or to some degree, that harsh inner voice is often an internalization of other people's voices, whether it's a parent, a teacher, someone who was a key figure early in our lives. We often take those voices on and we speak to ourselves in that way and relate to ourselves in that way, often without noticing. So again, it's a sign of progress just to start catching that voice and to sort of realise, oh, okay, maybe that doesn't make me feel so good speaking to myself like that. I wonder if I could just soften that a little bit or step out of it.
Because if that internal voice was a radio station,
Yeah.
and radio station rumination, and they're like, oh,
rumination radio.
Yeah, or worry radio, self-criticism radio.
Yeah.
We kind of wouldn't think to tune into that radio station. And in a sense, it's not arguing with that thinking or anything else, because that's just more default mental activity. It's just like, oh yeah, that's there, I could just tune into something else.
Yes.
Bird singing, refrigerator humming, whatever it might be, the tea we're drinking, but coming back to what we're doing. Yeah. So there are also some considerations as well about, say, the bigger picture of mindfulness and slowing down and was some of the reflections by a number of learners that have really been interesting is, and especially in the COVID thing of slowing down, is just more gratitude, more savouring. For example, it's a great thing to just have a few mindful moments prior to having a meal.
Yeah, beautiful.
And just to taste the food more. And just to be thankful, even for the small things. And we often are, if there's awareness. And so those observations around gratitude and savouring were really quite striking.
I mean, I guess the flip side, or like the silver lining of COVID, is that for a lot of people, things have slowed down a little bit. And that standard routine's been chucked right out the window. And of course, busyness and a fixed routine can get in the way of actually being present. So this is a time when the way the world is working is perhaps supporting us to be more mindful. At the same time as, of course, lots of existential anxiety and all that kind of stuff happening. So it's a very, very interesting time to be learning mindfulness in an online course like this.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's all we've got for this week. Next week, massive week, really interesting stuff coming up. We've got the cognitive practices, the big 4 cognitive practices, so we can start again to observe even more closely how our mind works. We're going to look at very popular topics like procrastination, multitasking.
Oh, it's a favourite. Yeah.
Learning to focus on one thing.
Well, do you want to do that next week or put it off to the week after?
I guess we better get it done sooner or later. But
Okay.
yeah, at some point we'll get to procrastination. But next week, definitely the multitasking piece.
Yeah.
Really challenging this assumption and also looking at how we can use mindfulness to be more productive. So in the meantime, stay safe, look after each other, and we'll see you next week.
Have a mindful week.
Look at this bucket seat from 1974. It's so good.